Hello, and welcome to another episode of Perspectives from the Informed Perspective. We're Penny and Jenny, and if this is your first time tuning in, thank you for joining us. This podcast is where we explore what it means to build thoughtful, grounded communities shaped by our local lives, but enriched by voices and ideas from around the world. We believe meaningful change begins with listening, really listening, especially to experiences that challenge or expand our own. Today, we're diving into a topic that's becoming more visible, but not always better understood: neurodiversity. We often hear about neurodivergence, autism, ADHD, dyslexia, and more, but neurodiversity is a broader concept. It includes everyone, neurotypical and neurodivergent alike, and celebrates the natural variation in how our brains work. Like biodiversity in nature, these differences make our communities stronger and more resilient. For some people, discovering neurodiversity can feel like a lifeline, a way to finally put words to experiences they've long carried. For others, the term may be tangled in labels, stigma, or misconceptions. Part of that confusion comes from language. Neurodiversity isn't something an individual has, and being neurodivergent doesn't begin and end with ADHD or autism. It's a broad landscape, often including cognitive profiles that go unseen or unnamed. So what exactly is neurodiversity? Neurodiversity refers to the natural variation in human brains and cognitive functioning, the incredible diversity in how minds perceive, process, and respond to the world. It's a biological reality, not a belief system, political position, or personal trait. No individual is neurodiverse. Instead, when someone's cognitive functioning differs from what society considers typical, we describe them as neurodivergent. There is no single normal or correct kind of brain, only a culturally constructed idea that certain patterns of thinking, learning, sensing, or behaving are standard, while others are deviations. That idea is no more valid than claiming there's one right ethnicity, gender, or culture. Humanity is neurodiverse in the same way it is racially, ethnically, and culturally diverse. Neurotypical people are part of that spectrum. The opposite of neurodiverse would be neurohomogeneous, something humanity has never been. So what does it mean to be neurodivergent? What does it mean to be neurotypical? And how do we come to treat one way of thinking as the standard against which all others are measured? Many of us grew up in systems built around a narrow model of how children should learn, behave, focus, communicate, or cope. These systems often privilege one type of brain, the neurotypical brain. Children and adults who think, feel, sense, or process differently are often misunderstood, overlooked, or labeled before they are listened to. And as we've mentioned, labels themselves can be double-edged, empowering when chosen, limiting when imposed. The term neurodiverse is a big umbrella term that covers a wide range of conditions. It includes well-known neurodivergent profiles like autism, ADHD, and dyslexia, but also extends to less obvious differences like dyscalculia, dyspraxia, Tourette's, and tic disorders, sensory processing differences, and auditory or visual processing differences. Can also include nonverbal learning disorders, intellectual or developmental differences, and even traits like synesthesia, aphantasia, the inability to visualize images in your mind, and face blindness. Essentially, it's any variation in the way human brains perceive, process, and respond to the world. When you start to look at the numbers, it's pretty staggering. According to Deloitte, roughly 10 to 20% of people globally may be neurodivergent. Some other sources suggest the number might be even higher. In a world of about 8 billion people, that corresponds to hundreds of millions, potentially even over a billion, living with brains that fall outside the standard neurotypical template. Think about school for a second. Many neurodivergent students need individualized support. In fact, a 2024 school health survey in the UK's Wakefield district found that about 30% of 16 to 17-year-olds self-identified as neurodiverse. If that reflects a broader trend, it could suggest that in many classrooms, there are several students whose brains and learning styles differ from the neurotypical norm. And around 1 in 3 neurodivergent people experience mental health challenges like anxiety or depression, often linked to stigma or chronic exclusion. And they have an increased likelihood of mental health struggles later in life. People with autism, for example, face elevated risks of anxiety, depression, and even suicidal behavior. And children with autism have a 4 times higher risk of medical and psychiatric comorbidities. Socially, neurodivergent individuals also experience higher rates of bullying, difficulties forming friendships, school exclusion, unemployment, and in some cases, even contact with the justice system. The workplace is another area where neurodiversity really matters. Companies that embrace neurodiverse teams often see 10 to 15% higher productivity, and studies suggest that neurodiverse teams can be up to 30% more productive than teams made up solely of neurotypical people. Beyond productivity, neurodivergence brings incredible strengths: creative problem solving, outside the box thinking, and visual spatial skills that are invaluable across industries. Another notable point is that many people with neurodivergent profiles have multiple diagnoses. In one survey, only about a third had a single condition, while many have had 2 or even 3. When we look at the big 3, dyslexia, autism, and ADHD, they make up around 70% of all neurodevelopmental diagnoses. Some numbers for context. Autism affects about 1 in 100 children globally, while ADHD is diagnosed in 5 to 7% of children worldwide. In the UK, it's roughly 1 in 68, and in the US, about 1 in 54. Dyslexia affects 10 to 15% of the population, though the real figure could be higher if you include undiagnosed cases or those with subtler difficulties. Over the past 2 decades, many countries have seen dramatic rises in autism and ADHD diagnoses, with some age groups experiencing several-fold increases. Prescriptions for ADHD medications have also surged. Experts note, however, that much of this reflects greater awareness, broader diagnostic criteria, and better access to care, not necessarily a sudden increase in neurodivergence itself. Despite these improvements, diagnostic services are struggling to keep pace in some countries. In many parts of the UK, people are now waiting months or even years for public assessments, and private referrals can also take a long time. So when you step back and look at it all, it really hits home how individual and complex a subject this is. Every statistic represents a human being navigating the world in a unique way. And that's why thinking about inclusion, understanding, and support isn't just the right thing to do, it's essential. We're approaching this topic today as facilitators of lived experience. By sharing stories of identity, education, workplace, culture, family life, and resilience, we hope to highlight the strength that diverse minds bring and the changes needed to ensure that they are truly recognized. We'll be inviting a conversation that could take us in a number of directions, perhaps exploring the role of diagnosis, the way education can overlook different styles of learning, or the emotional weight of masking. We may also touch on inclusion and what it looks like when people are supported to thrive as themselves. At the heart, this episode will be about understanding, listening deeply to experiences, and appreciating the richness that comes from a world designed for many kinds of minds. Before we meet our incredible panel today, I want to begin with a few words of some writers and thinkers. Ronan Danziger, therapist and writer in the Therapist's Handbook for Neurodivergent People. To understand the neurodivergent mind is not to fix it, but to learn its language, honor its rhythms, and discover the strength in difference. This is where the journey begins. Jolene Stockman, author of Notes for Neuronavigators. A diagnosis is not a prediction. It doesn't tell you what's possible. It doesn't change you, your colleague, your child, or your friend. It just opens up tricks and tools to thrive. Holly Smale, British author, in her book Cassandra in Reverse. But I find being around people so hard, any people. There's all this noise and light and colour and sensation all the time, and I don't know how to read tone or emotions or jokes or sarcasm or flirting. It's like all the things that everyone else can do automatically, I have to do manually, and I get overwhelmed constantly. That's the face you're seeing. It's me trying to process everything at once. And Linda Millay Hunt, former teacher and the author of Fish in a Tree. Everyone is smart in different ways, but if you judge a fish on its ability to climb a tree, it will spend its whole life thinking that it's stupid. And Sunny Jane Wise, author of We're All Neurodiverse. Identifying as neurodivergent isn't just another label, it's also an identity, it's a reclamation, it's a song. When we call ourselves neurodivergent, we are reclaiming our differences that society calls abnormal or wrong. And when we call ourselves neurodivergent, we are rejecting the concept of disorders. And finally, Susan Hampshire, Susan's story, my struggle with dyslexia. But there is yet another prejudice that dyslexics and those who try to help them have to combat. This is the deep-rooted idea that all learning, all education, any expression of ideas must be done through language, through words. The idea that it's possible to learn and communicate visually through colour and shape seems to be heresy, though it is one that naturally occurs to dyslexics. So now I'll pass to Jenny to introduce our guests for today.
Thank you, Penny. So this is our first panel with 5 people, and I'm really pleased that we've got so many people to share their perspectives on this important topic. So without further ado, we've got Adara is a Nigerian-born entrepreneur, speaker, and transformation strategist whose work sits at the intersection of leadership, identity, and operational excellence. With over a decade leading major projects across e-commerce, logistics, and public sector infrastructure, he blends real-world execution with deep personal insight. He is the founder and CEO of Stay Light Inc., a Texas-based hydration and wellness company, and the force behind Gifted Stylists, a strategic advisory firm serving founders, executives, and mission-driven organizations. Odera is also a best-selling author and a creator of The Well, a rising movement focused on building stronger men, stronger families, and generational leaders. Born dyslexic, he turned what many call a limitation into the strategic advantage behind his systems thinking, spiritual clarity, and the ability to see patterns others miss. Above everything, he is a husband and father, and the legacy that fuels his purpose. And Dr. Mai is a lawyer, energy expert, and longtime advocate for diversity and inclusion across STEM and motorsport. Maya works at the intersection of green technologies, leadership, and youth empowerment, and is deeply committed to creating spaces where every young person, especially those who are neurodivergent, feels seen, valued, and able to thrive. She founded Minds on Track, where she helps high performance and motorsport teams strengthen mental performance and build inclusive, neurodiversity aware cultures. Her own experience with ADHD has shaped not only how she thinks and works, but how she supports others in embracing their own strengths. Her perspectives brings both expertise and authenticity. She is passionate about helping young people understand that their minds are not a limitation, but a powerful source of innovation, creativity, and resilience. And Marcus is a neurodiversity coach, consultant, and culture transformation specialist who combines lived experience with over 20 years of global business leadership. Diagnosed as autistic in his late 40s, he speaks openly about mass autism, the impact of late discovery, and what it means to finally understand yourself after decades of feeling different. He helps neurodivergent people thrive by developing strategies that fit how their minds naturally work, and he advises organizations on creating environments that genuinely include, rather than unintentionally exclude, neurodivergent thinkers. And Pilar is a social services leader, writer, and speaker whose work is shaped by both professional expertise and lived experience. Originally from Spain, she studied social pedagogy in Sweden and has since built a wide-ranging career across frontline and leadership roles, most recently becoming a service leader in a housing support for people with learning disability and mental health needs. Her journey spans 30 years of navigating trauma, bipolar disorder, and social exclusion while moving across countries and roles, all before discovering in her 40s that she is autistic and gifted. The late diagnosis reframed her past and fueled a deep commitment to understanding the brain, healing, and advocating for change. Pilar speaks openly about resilience, systemic failures, and the harm caused when services misunderstand neurodivergent people. She is also the author of a literary fiction novel exploring memory, trauma, and the hidden impact of social systems. Through her work, she amplifies voices often overlooked and helps others find clarity, dignity, and hope in their own stories. And Lara is a journalist and founder of the Lonely Club, created in 2023 to spark honest storytelling around loneliness in young people. What started as a platform for sharing personal experiences has grown into real life meetups that offer young people a supportive space to connect, talk openly, and feel less alone. Over the past year, Lara has also focused on the intersection of neurodivergence and loneliness. Through listening to others and reflecting on her own experiences, she has gained insight into how neurodivergence shapes social connection, belonging, and the emotional challenges young people face. This work has strengthened her commitment to creating safe, stigma-free spaces where different ways of thinking and feeling are understood, valued, and celebrated. Already, that is such an inspirational panel and hearing about all your experiences just in those short bios. So let's get going, Penny, and hear from them directly.
Great. I would like to turn to Maya first today. Um, Maya, thank you for joining us. Had so many questions I wanted to ask you because you have such an amazing profile, but we
Thank
settled today
you.
that we wanted to go for a bit on the side of education. And I wanted to ask you, what do you think is the biggest misconception schools still have about neurodivergent students? And how does the stigma in school settings impact a young person's confidence or identity?
Okay, hello everybody, once again, and maybe I would like to give you answer by telling about my experience from my high school. I know it was a long time ago, but frankly speaking, there is nothing to change or just a little bit. So maybe like this. I had 16 years old in high school, Polish war in Warsaw High School, and I had really big problem with math. It was like really big problem with math. I just couldn't understand this. And even I had some of additional lessons after school. I just couldn't. It was something horrible for me. And I remember that my mother went to meet with a teacher, and they started to talk about myself. It was quite the end of the year, and my teacher, she told to my mother that because I have so bad notes because of math, so if I won't get like three better notes, I won't pass to another class. And it was 19th. I had 16 years old. I was a girl, and it was like situation that we in the school they spoke about AGTD because of behavior of boys and because they were so loudly. So yes, there was like naughty and me and my problems with math. So lucky I got this three better notes. But the teacher said to my mother that the problem is that I'm the less intelligent. So that's why I have a problem with math. So of course, how I said, I got this three good notes and I passed another class. And lucky for me, like in another class, higher class, I didn't have math. So, because it was high school like this. But the case was that I got my diagnosis when I had 41, 16, 41. And quite all of my life, I thought that something is wrong with me. I just couldn't understand like myself, and I thought about myself that I'm less intelligent, even that I finished law university in Warsaw. I wrote my PhD in energy law. I used to learn 10 languages, and I finished postgraduate studies in nuclear law. It was always with me that I'm less intelligent. And when I got this diagnosis when I had 41, it was by accident because I had just big trauma in my life. And after I just felt very bad, like mentally. and I just couldn't like organize my life. It was really difficult. Like in my office, it was everything okay, but like in my private life, I just couldn't organize like nothing. For my husband, who is dyslexic, but he's thinking very logical, it was just my behavior was strange. So because I had some consultation with my psychologist, and she said, let's make the test if you are neurodiverse. And we made it. And you know what? It was the most beautiful day in my life when I got diagnosed that I have ADHD and I have dyscalculia. So that's why I had a problem with math. So it was the most beautiful day in my life because in this day I understood who am I and why I'm like this and why I don't understand math and why I had like some problems with some organization. And but you know, the case it was that that was the moment when I understood that I'm not less intelligent. I'm intelligent. I'm very intelligent. So that's why, because my brain is working like this. And that's why, because my ADHD, of course, there is a lot of disadvantage which I'm working every day, but it gives me so many advantages. If I can use it, I can just make big, nice things. So I can say that everything what I made from my diagnose, it was 3 years ago, to this moment, it was because of my amazing advantages of creativity, and it's because I trust my brain. And this is the time after a diagnosis that I accepted, because I didn't fight this, I just accept this. And I said, let's go. And that was amazing. So the case in school, and it's that is still stigma, that if we are thinking in a different way, if we have behavior in a different way, so even when I right now look back into my school and I look on some of my friends, and I remember that, for example, the rest of the class, they just hate some girls or boys because they behave in a different way. Today I know because this boy or girl, there was neurodiverse. So it's terrible because there is no conversation about this, and teachers are not prepared to see the difference. They don't are prepared for conversation and even to talk with parents and even to talk with teenagers, because this is being neurodiverse. It's not something like stigma. It's difficult, yes, but it also is beautiful. And this is this possibilities which I think that education need to just check. And I would like to say one more thing, because on October, I used to be in Atlanta in the first neurodiverse school, the Howard School. There is like for 500 children, high school, primary school, and children garden. And I can say it's we can do this. It was the most beautiful, colorful school I ever seen, like with smiling children, with respect, no hate, like with teachers who really have this empathy to teach the children. It was amazing for me because we had their conference, this dyslexic conference. So, and we had meeting with some of the teachers and children, teenagers. And that was so amazing because they were so open about neurodiverse, and for them it wasn't stigma. And I hope that maybe one day we will also have this kind of school in Poland, in Europe, in UK, because in UK there is also case about neurodiverse unrepresented communities, which is a bigger problem, like for us. So there is a lot of things to do. And
Mm.
I know that from 90s, when I had 16, to this moment, nothing's changed.
Yeah, I mean, I think amazing story that you've had. I mean, I can't imagine how many years you didn't have that diagnosis and you didn't have the support. I guess it sort of goes back to if your teachers had supported you at the time, it would have been a completely different story for you, and you wouldn't have then put yourself down. I can't even begin to imagine how many years then you sort of thought, what would be wrong with me when there was a perfectly obvious example, reason for it. But what I do think the struggle is that yes, inclusive schools is absolutely what we want. We want neurodiverse schools. But if we haven't got the resources and we're not supporting the educational system and we're not saying teachers are valuable and, we do have to. Another conversation that comes up for me is that you do have a huge spectrum of children within the classroom. So you've got to be able to have different types of teachers within the classroom to be able to deal with that setup. And absolutely, it's possible, which is what you're saying. But if we're not investing in that and we're not seeing the value of that, it's not going to work, right?
And I loved what you said as well, Maya. It's just like the simple having the conversations, but then that often requires the time. And then when resources are stretched, then, that's time is one of the things that's sacred. And, something that came to my mind is, let's say back in the 90s, um, early 2000s, children were labeled disruptive, behavioral problems without really understanding the other neurodivergent challenges they might have. I I wonder now if we're almost going, but to your point, nothing's really changed, but almost the labels have changed, and you're getting the label or a potential, oh, they could have ADHD, and then that's the conversations still aren't happening, and the environment isn't changing, like you said, but the labels almost are, oh, okay, we're inclusive because we can identify, but and that's why I think the conversations was the most pertinent point you made, because it's until we start talking to the individuals who are struggling, who are facing challenges, who aren't having a normal trajectory of academic achievement, social development, social progress, until you start learning about those individuals, then nothing really will change. So
Yes, that's true. And it's like just giving, I don't know, a few minutes to try to understand. It's like I know it like teaching right now all teachers about different types of neurodiverse, it will be long process. But even if we put a little empathy, a little reflection, and just a little understanding, it will change the way of thinking for the young people because they will feel being understanding and not telling that, oh my God, you are less intelligent because you don't understand math.
Mm.
It's not the way because that was stigma for quite whole my life, this moment. So just a little empathy,
Mm. And I
just a
wonder,
little
yeah,
empathy.
I also wonder if it's also including parents in the conversation as well, because if you're going to have a sort of that inclusive classroom and inclusive setting, educational system, we need to be having that conversation as well with the generation that were brought up not understanding that. So my generation as well, a lot of the neurodiverse terminology I didn't learn at school. I haven't had that knowledge and experience. So if you're talking about maybe I'm saying it as potentially, you might be concerned about your child in a class where there are lots of different needs needing to be met, and you might find that your child's needs are not being met. So I do think it's also having the conversation with the parents and the other generation as well to sort of
But there is
feedback.
one thing more because we already know that neurodiverse is genetic. It's like not obvious, but in general, science is showing that is genetic. So it's another case for parents, because sometimes parents, they don't want to understand that because their child is like this, it's because it's genetic, it's from them. So, and sometimes for them it's difficult just to look into the mirror and just try to have this reflection that maybe I'm dyslexic, or maybe I'm also ADHD, have ADHD. So maybe this is why. And it's not like blaming the child, but it's not, we cannot blame here anyone, because this is the brain, the way of our thinking. So sometimes if we look at this case like from a different side, like that I can develop myself with the child to understand him, and the same understand myself.
Yeah.
Because maybe, for example, for neurodiverse woman, because we need to remember that neurodiverse woman is with ADHD is different type than ADHD with men. So it's like when we look at this like very interesting path to understand, to develop together, to to build the connection and to try understand their child on, or not fix it, just help, like support. It's better, it's support. And the same, understand ourselves. It can be really amazing adventure for
Yeah.
parents and for children.
Yeah.
And it's just because we need to be open-minded. And I think that this is the case, to be open-minded, to have the reflection and not fix, just to try understand and go by this path together with the child.
Yeah, and to start those conversations, absolutely. Marcus, I'd like to turn to you next. You're a coach, and I wanted to ask you a little bit on another question, sort of related to your coaching. But many neurodivergent adults have to mask. They mask for decades. What was unmasked for you once you understood your wiring?
Well, thank you first, Penny and Jenny, for organising this. It's any conversation about these topics is a good conversation as far as I'm concerned, and it's great to have other people here who, I guess we share views, but also have differences. So it'll be good to hear. Maybe before, Penny, before I answer your question about unmasking, let me give you a bit of background on how I came to masking in the first place. So my mother actually tells a story of when I was 11 or 12, and when I came home from school, and I apparently, I don't remember, apparently I said, I am going to be the best at everything I do. And before that, I wasn't, believe me. And I sort of now, of course, in hindsight, 40 years later, this is when I think I realized that I was fundamentally different from the vast majority of people I interacted with. And I realized that being me wasn't going to help me be successful, whatever successful meant for 11, 12-year-old, I don't know. And I suppose that's when I started masking. I'm now 54. I was 55, sorry. I was diagnosed autistic 6.5, 7 years ago, which meant that I masked actively, completely for close to 40 years of my life. And I still mask. To be transparent, I'm masking now, otherwise I wouldn't be here. I couldn't do this if I didn't put on the Marcus that can do this. So what did 40 years of masking do for me? Well, I got what I wanted. I was very successful in everything I did. Got a great family, very successful career, lived around the world in all sorts of interesting places, interacted with all sorts of interesting people, did all sorts of interesting things, made a decent amount of money. All of that I got. And yet, what did I also get from masking for 40 years? I became the mask. There was no me. And in fact, some people told me, and I remember this, it was probably one of those first awareness moments, told me, Marcus, I don't know who you are. You're this person, then you're that person, you're like this, then you're like that, then I like you, then I don't like you. And that was this was probably going back a decade now. And I realized, okay, well, what does that mean? But I was still in this mode of, if I'm me, I can't be successful, therefore I can't be me, therefore I mask. Now, this all came to a big crash in starting in my mid-40s through to my late 40s. External circumstances, so family tragedy, my father died. And that just hit me, like a ton of bricks. And it meant that this complete continuous regulation that I did was no longer possible. I just couldn't do it. And so I started falling apart. Short story is probably was a burnout, although of course, typical to my masking characteristic, I never let on. The only people who knew that I was going through that were the people very, very close to me. No one else knew. But what that made me realize is I can't do this anymore. I can't mask. It wasn't even I shouldn't, because I should be myself. It was I just can't do it. And then gradually, I actually heard of, well, I knew of autism, of course, but I associated it to people who need a lot of support. So what's on the ASD level 3. I'd never even imagined that autism could manifest itself in other ways. Gradually learned a few things and then eventually diagnosed. And when I was diagnosed, the moment it was good to have a label, to be honest. It was good to say, okay, yeah, now I understand. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, tick, tick, tick. This is all me. This is why I'm like this. And now I don't like labels. And obviously, neurodivergence is a spectrum, a very big spectrum. Autism itself within that is a very big spectrum. I don't like labels, but I think they're useful for us to communicate about things. So I do tend to use them. And so what is unmasking like? Well, there's several dimensions to it. There was a cognitive dimension, which is when I told myself, just as I told myself when I was 11 or 12, I'm going to be the best at everything I do. I told myself, I'm not going to do this anymore. So that was a cognitive moment. Guess what? It took 6 or 7 years for my emotional self to catch up with the cognition. And that's resulted in a lot of turmoil in all aspects of my life, including with myself, so it's a bit cliche to say I didn't like myself at some stage, but I didn't like myself because my brain was telling me one thing and the rest of me was telling me something else. And gradually, I just started making changes. So one of the big changes I did is I quit my big corporate job, which helped tremendously in changing all the drama in my life. I was in one of those jobs, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. They're always on, always on. I had responsibility for people around the world. So, there was never an opportunity to be off. And so getting rid of that made a difference. It made a huge difference. You know what? It took me 2 years to feel normal without having that prop in my life, because that had become my identity. But I got rid of that. And honestly, I also started setting boundaries. Part of masking, I mean, you could equate masking as not setting boundaries. You become what the other person wants so that you match, so that you fit them, you achieve with them. So I had no boundaries. So I started setting boundaries. That part of masking was also painful. Honestly, some people even told me, well, I preferred you the way you were. What's going on with you? Well, those people are no longer in my life. Good for them. Good for me. So setting boundaries was important. But again, this is a gradual process. I'm sort of saying it as a few words, but it took the best part of probably 5 years to get to a point where I am now, well, where I was maybe 2 years ago, where I feel I'm in control of my life the way I want my life to be. And the last 2 years in particular, I felt liberated. I felt I can do what I want to do. I can be me. Oh, and by the way, I am marginally successful in business at being me. I'm not, not making the money I used to make, but I'm okay. I'm much more satisfied. And the people I interact with, which again are fewer than were before, because I'm now showing who I am, the people I interact with are people that I enjoy being with, people that I feel I can, be myself with. So that's what unmasking is. And maybe just the final word on that is, look, I can only speak from my own experience and that maybe of other people who have been diagnosed late in life, is it's painful, very painful. And yet I knew it was the right thing to do. So I just did it.
Mm.
So I
Thank
hope that
you.
answers your question.
Yeah, no, thank you for putting your mask on this evening, even though you might not have wanted to, so that we could actually hear
I'm
from
trying
you.
to get to the point where I don't have to have the mask, but I
Yeah.
just the stimulation is a lot for me, so you can understand that it has to have a
Yeah,
mask.
I mean, it makes me feel incredibly sad. And I just think of children as well. I mean, you were a child as well once upon a time. And just thinking that you were saying how, you know, you've got to learn to have boundaries. Children adapt, don't they? They fit in, they don't have the boundaries. And I just think if they're putting on masks when they're so small and people aren't maybe picking up on what's actually going on for them. And I think that must play a huge part in their not having a diagnosis as at an earlier point.
I mean, you're right. No one, or who knows what happened 40 years ago, when I was diagnosed, everyone was surprised. The only person who wasn't surprised was me. I mean, even my mother, when I spoke to her, I mean, she accepted, of course, and understood, but it wasn't obvious to her. My sister, with whom I had a very close relationship, apparently, until I was maybe 13, 14, saw nothing. Obviously, at school, no one saw anything, even if, they were equipped. They probably weren't, but, they might have been equipped to see neurodivergence, but they didn't say anything. So it was perfectly invisible. And that defines my life until my, mid to late 40s is I was neurotypical for all intents and purposes,
Yeah, and
but
if you
I wasn't. Right.
yeah, and as you say, because the spectrum's also so wide, broad, and everybody is individual and everyone has something else going on. It's not something anyway that you can just read the list and say that's what it is, right? So I think that makes it even all the more complicated.
And I really appreciate, so everyone's vulnerability as well, and it's these societal expectations of success that we put on ourselves, but it's there out there in society, of what it is to be successful, how you need to be, how you need to conduct yourself, what it is to be intelligent. You must, all know all the subjects, really well, and that's not the case. Intelligence is, and I think that's what's, you know, the kind of boundaries and the things that need to be brought down is that everyone is individual and everyone's going to have a different path, as we all do. And it's okay to determine your success or your attainment and achievement in different ways. But I think it takes experience, and with that comes age, where we have the confidence and we and the strength maybe or the and also I made a note as well, sometimes it's it is triggered by trauma or challenges as well, that space is created for us to be able to rewrite that and say, actually, I was put myself down this road of what success should be, or what it is like to be intelligent, but actually this is how I want to carry on the journey. And I think it's hard to hear when it comes so late in life, and the struggles that people will have had or had to sort of come out the other side. But actually, that's what this conversation I hopefully will empower, is the support you can give to people that, might show up a bit differently as well, or, just want to be themselves, and that's not, seen to be as how they should be. So.
Marcus, would you say from your coaching experience with the people you're working with that it is often trauma is the trigger that it comes to, is the point where adults often then get their diagnosis?
In my experience, almost always. Because, you build your life over time into something that you become very comfortable with, or at least maybe the material aspect of it. And so to move away from that, you really need something deep inside that's making you feel, I can't do this anymore. And I mean, I'd have to go through my list of the people I work with. I don't think there's a single one who didn't come to a transformation, to accepting themselves without having a major trauma in their life. So yes, I think it is very common.
Okay. I'm gonna have to move on. Lara, I'd like to turn to you next. Very inspired by your Lonely Club that you set up because it's very sort of synergy to what we're doing. But I wanted to ask you a bit more, not directly just about the Lonely Club, but how it shaped your understanding of how neurodivergent influences young people's experiences of loneliness and belonging.
Yeah. Um, yeah, so since setting up the Lonely Club, and from my personal experience, I think I've learned that there just isn't enough safe, inclusive spaces for young people to just be themselves and feel accepted completely as they are. And from all of the research I've done about loneliness, that is the core. It's feeling accepted and safe to be yourself. And I think as a result, young people socially isolate themselves. That was my experience as a young, undiagnosed autistic and ADHD girl at school. I'm a twin sister. I'm a twin. So um at the age of 13, my identical twin sister got very, very ill. She got diagnosed with an eating disorder and got taken out of school. And that meant that I was left on my own. And where I'd always had my twin sister join at the hip, I was then suddenly left to socialize and make friends. And I couldn't do that. So I hid in the library. I started masking, and that led into my teenage 20s, late 20s, and it's almost like this pressure to upkeep the mask. And within that, I didn't realize what it felt to just feel that sense of belonging, just to be myself. So yeah, I mean, when you look at the research of like loneliness and neurodivergence, like autistic people are 4 times more likely to experience chronic loneliness than non-autistic people. So chronic loneliness is feeling lonely often or always. And in hindsight, I look back and realize that that's how I felt my whole kind of age 13 to 27 when I was diagnosed. So running the Lonely Club inadvertently has really highlighted the power of having the right environment for young people. So my whole ethos is just creating these really safe, low pressure spaces where young people don't have to perform and they can just show up and be themselves, and they don't have to make small talk, or they don't have to even socialize if they don't want to. They can just be around people and read a book or do their own thing. They just don't have to mask and pretend to be someone they're not, because from my experience, that leads to isolation and avoiding connection and socializing completely. And as humans, we're born to connect and to socialize. So my mission is to find a way for young people to do that. And I think the biggest lesson for me has been that loneliness isn't caused by being neurodivergent. It's caused by the lack of spaces that understand and support the neurodivergent way of socializing and being. And there needs to be more safe, inclusive spaces to cater for those young people who need that support. And in doing so, I think we could prevent so many kind of issues going into teenage, early 20s, late 20s, and adulthood. And part of that is, recognizing diagnosis is really important for me. It was life-changing being diagnosed, and I'm extremely lucky to be diagnosed at 27 because I'm aware it could have been a lot longer. But kind of like what Marcus was saying, I mean, I have had quite a lot of trauma in my life, but it got to the point where I was isolating myself so much that it it held me back in my life, and I needed to find a way forward. And the Lonely Club is my way of doing that. So yeah, I hope I can use my experience to help other young people as well find that kind of sense of belonging, and really feel valued, I think, in society, if nothing else.
Yeah, and I love that emphasis on not having to perform, like turn up to a space and just be who you want to be and don't have to fill any specific capacity. And like you said, you can just be reading your book if you want to. Maybe there's something else going on, and if you choose, you want to join that or you don't. Absolutely love it. And that's kind of a bit like what we're trying to do with our tween talk as well, is create the space as well. It doesn't matter whether you're neurodivergent or not, or neurotypical. It's just giving you that opportunity to have a space, like you said, that's safe. And that is where you
Yeah.
can be who you want to be. But what I was thinking about, and earlier on today, was how, we do a lot of work with trying to encourage schools to bring motivational speakers in and having these real life stories told. And I was thinking back to like my child, and I'm pretty sure even for my children now, I'm not sure they ever had anyone come in and talk to them really in detail about neurodivergence at all. I'm pretty sure
No.
that's never happened. So again, it's all very well, wanting to change things, but if we're not having those conversations at an early age with everybody so that we all understand what we're talking about, then I don't see how that is also getting anywhere. And I was curious about it. I thought, actually, no one's ever told me anything like that. There's never been that input.
In one of
And I
our
think that,
first, yeah, sorry, look, I was just going to say, Lara, that in one of our first tween talks, when we had a small group and we asked them what they would want to explore in terms of topics, that actually came up because they wanted to, these 10-year-olds wanted to understand children in their class that they know are autistic, and they wanted to understand them more because they haven't been given the
Yeah.
information.
yeah, they're also, I feel there's not very much or enough awareness around the signs and symptoms of autism, kind of like what Marcus was saying. When I told my friends and my family that my therapist even flagged that I might be autistic, they said, "No, Lara, you're the least autistic person ever. You love having deep chats, you love being around people, all of these things." And that made me feel so misunderstood and invalidated, and like I had to mask even more. And then in hindsight, growing up, I was always labeled as too sensitive and I was too emotional and I reacted too heavily to things. And that is a massive sign of like high masking autism in women, especially. And if like my parents, teachers had that even an ounce of awareness of that trait, then I believe it would have prevented like a decade of loneliness and mental health issues for me. Um, yeah.
That's so sad, but it seems amazing that now you're making it your mission to make sure that less people are
Yeah.
having to have that happen to them. But I think absolutely that's like the start of the conversation, is how, we support one another and then we're just there for one another. And then you can be the best person, your personal self, right? You can be the best that you can be.
I'm not shortcutting to a quick panel, but I'm really curious, Lara and Marcus, and anyone please, but when you've referenced like obviously from a masking perspective, you're hiding who you truly want to be. Can you, in a couple of words, explain to us and the listeners, like if you could have been who you wanted to be in your younger age, teens, who would that have been, and what would you have been able to show?
Yeah, I can start. For me, it would have been, I would have felt able to use my voice. So because I was always labeled as too sensitive, too emotional, I lost my voice. I couldn't speak, and that led to shutdowns, and it's led to me having to do a lot of work to regain power over using my voice and sharing my opinion and sharing my insights, because that was always shut down. So I think that freedom of being able to speak and express is how my younger 13-year-old self, I wish she could have felt.
Amazing. I'm glad you've got your voice and you're here
Mm.
today, so it's an honor. Marcus, do you have any insight into that?
I'm thinking how to answer. I don't really know. I mean, I guess what I can say is that not being yourself constantly it's soul destroying. And so what I would have been is myself, and I wouldn't have been soul destroying for too long in my life. I think of what I did to cope, all the typical things, mostly alcohol. But when I look back to my teenage years, so I mean, as far as I remember, I don't know, 15, 16, the only way I could interact with people is if I was drunk, literally. So that's what I did, and that mode continued for far too long. I'll no doubt regret that when I get older. My liver tells me, you did some things when you were young you should have done. It's so I think it's not so much of what would I have done. It's just to be you. to be you and not worry that you're going to be completely rejected because you're you.
But that's because of the environment around you, right? Because if the environment around you isn't receptive to you being you, you've got to have those safe spaces in order to be yourself.
But there were none.
Yeah, I know.
There were no, the only
It's the
safe
pub,
space,
it's
the only way you're safe. And then, of course, to Lara's point, you become more and more and more lonely because you realize the only way I'm okay without having to pretend is when I'm on my own. Okay. And then you suddenly realize, well, being on your own isn't great all the time either. So anyway, as you say,
we say about the spaces, and it'd be interesting when we get to Adara's, because for men as well, I think it's really, there isn't the spaces still today. There is more coming up, but I think I interrupted you and said the pub, like a whimsical comment, but where do you men go to generally socialize, and it's the pub, and if you are masking and then you're turning to drink, and that's where your confidence is, and so anyway, I'll let you carry on, Penny. I'm digressing.
Yeah, no worries. I'd like to move on to Pilla now. So you've been working for over 15 years across all different types of sectors. What systematic patterns do you see repeating across health, education, and justice when it comes to supporting people with support needs?
Hi everyone. I would like to say before I answer your question, many people, many individuals right now, many young people, they are masking right now and they don't know they are doing it. They mimic behaviors, they mirror people, and they are not aware they are doing it. This impacts enormously in your body, your brain, your mind. And if they grow up, they grow, they become adults, and they don't realize this is what is happening. That is when all this trauma, mental health flourish. So it's important to know that, and people know that not everyone who the neurodivergent people know that actually what they are doing is masking. They just move on in life doing it. And some people, they never realize. And also I would like to say that a diagnosis is not necessary to identify yourself as a neurodivergent individual. That's important as well, because if we wait for a diagnosis, we can wait years. And as well, doctors sometimes, more often than not, confuse diagnosis. Before you get autism diagnosis, ADHD, and so on, you can have diagnosis as personality disorders or things that maybe they don't have nothing to do with you, but that happens very often as well. And about your question, also I would like to say that it's true that I have had all these jobs, but I have been also a window cleaner, a pet sitter, a factory worker. I have done hundreds of different jobs. I cannot even remember. I don't remember. And this is something that many people like myself, we get a leg diagnosis in life. They are gonna feel identified and they're gonna relate. We navigate through workplaces that actually are causing us more trauma before even we are aware that what is going on with us. So we are like in survival mode constantly, and our strategy sometimes is to quit jobs because there's no another option. We want to survive. That's important to say as well. And about your question, well, I think that the first systemic failure I have noticed is hypocrisy. The hypocrisy that many organizations, public services, in my experience, I have worked in the justice service in Spain, I have worked in health, social care in Scotland. Always is the same, hypocrisy. All these organizations, they have all these mission statements about inclusion, policies about everyone is the same, diversity, whatever it is. I have my notes here. So what they do is they show to staff training videos about inclusion. They, in their social media, they have diversity awards. And then when you as a worker, you go to HR to ask for support, what you find is an extension of management. HR, instead of protect staff, what they do is to put complaints in the bin. The complaints go anywhere. And all of a sudden, you are the problem, the reality gets twisted, and you go straight to the doctor because the trauma these people is causing to neurodivergent people is amazing. And this goes for both when you ask for adjustments at work or when you speak up about the bullying that you are getting. So that's the first failure in the system that I have noticed all the time in every single company I have worked, hypocrisy. The second failure is that everything is built on money. Money is what they think about, no humanity. There is this idea that neuroinclusion costs too much, but burnout, long-term sick leave from staff, constant turnover, tribunals, and so on, that for them that doesn't cost money. So these organizations, what they do is spend money in time of crisis, but they don't spend money in times when it's needed, that is to prevent all these things. But more, what the UK government is doing right now is saying to therapists and doctors, they need to tell to patients that they need to go back to work as a treatment plan. So the treatment plan is go back to your job. Jobs that are the cause of all those mental problems. So that's what the UK government and the system is doing. Another another failure I have seen constantly is lack of leadership in organizations, for example, in social care companies. The CEOs in these companies are businessmen. They have never done 1 hour direct care. They don't have experience in care, but they manage care homes with vulnerable people, with neurodivergent people, people with autism, with learning disabilities, and on and on and on. The bosses, the big bosses, don't have any idea about social care, and they just care about money. And this goes for companies that get budget from government and private ones, they say it doesn't matter. So the system keeps putting business-minded people in positions where empathy, trauma awareness, lived experience should be the first qualification. So basically, all the systems were not built in the first place for inclusion. They were built for efficiency, obedience, and control. Their foundation is capitalism and no compassion. No compassion for workers who think differently, no compassion for neurotypicals either, because we all have support needs. And of course, me in my case, because I have worked in care and in prison, those who they say they support, they absolutely they're not doing it. For me, there are two different kinds of people. I have met good people. I have met, most of them were really, really bad people. You have two people, the actors. The actors know they are doing bad things and they don't care. And then we have the puppets. The puppets, they do bad things because they think they have been conditioned that way by the system so deeply that they genuinely believe injustice is just how things work. In health, doctors follow the latest pharmaceutical trend before they even listen to the patient history. And unfortunately, many of these patients are neurodivergent people. Then you see, I have seen terrible reviews for community mental health centers in the UK. You go online, you can see the reviews of patients. Terrible. Patients are they're basically dying. But then what happened at the end of the year is that there is one organization, one external organization, that they say the system says that is independent. They do an audit about these community mental health centers, and in the audit there is no any complaint at all, and everything is wonderful. So when you speak up and you say this is not right, this is not the truth, what they do is to create another law of confidentiality to keep covering themselves up. In justice, when you are the victim, you need to have a mountain of evidence. You need audios, videos, dates. You need all of that. Because if not, they don't believe you. And even if they believe you, for example, bullying is considered a second-class crime. So
what would you,
neurodivergent people.
I was just going to say, what would you say needs to change then?
Well, unfortunately, the whole system is not built for neurodiversity. Their foundation is money, budgets. What they don't understand is that they're spending more money in things that actually it makes totally the opposite. They need to react. They need to prevent certain things instead of reaction. They prefer to go to tribunals because actually in the tribunals, people they don't win cases of bullying and so on, or a judgment at work. So for me, the best thing would be that neurodivergent people that understand how differences in our brains work, they need to be in positions where they can change things, frameworks, models, new models of education, whatever it is, but only people who actually know what is going on in our brains.
And that comes through advocacy, doesn't it? Advocating for your experience and, what you've been through and other people, and also that, leading by examples coming to mind, but, leading so that you have that influence and you can do it. And another thing that, made me think as you were talking, Pilar, is that peer-to-peer support, but the power that can have that shows up in organizations. And there's actually someone that I'd love to put Lara in touch with, who created that in these organizations for certain needs, not in this example neurodivergent needs, but then you can form that allyship within these organizations to have that influence and advocate for yourself, so the voice gets louder, as you're saying. Case by case is can often sadly be quite weak, but you need to build up that allyship
and representation and leadership, right?
I think the difference between neurodivergent and neurotypical people, I don't like that distinction because it's just so people can understand, but I don't like that. I don't like to say I am this and you are that. But actually I can see a difference. People like myself and the people that is in the podcast today, we understand and we have interiorized that there are different ways of thinking. But neurotypical people, they still have a struggle understanding that. That's the difference.
Agreed. That's the conversation that we're sort of all coming back to, that we need to talk about it, and it needs to be an open conversation for mutual understanding from every side. Adira, I'd like to turn to you now. You grew up navigating school without knowing that you were dyslexic, and you often describe feeling less than in academic spaces. How did you move from that sense of limitation to seeing your mind as an asset?
Well, before we go on, I actually shed a tear listening to everyone's testimony or story. It felt like hearing my life being played back in reverse and then frontal.
Really?
I was born in Nigeria. I grew up in Nigeria. I went through the Nigerian educational system where you have we call kindergarten, nursery school, primary school, secondary school, and university. I went to three primary schools, five secondary schools, and then two universities. So my academic journey was quite interesting.
Yeah.
I think my earliest memory from school comes from maybe primary two, primary three, when at the end of the school term you would have results and we used to come first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth in class. And I remember coming, I think it was like seventh or something, and my mom had my report card. And she would always say, like, the teachers would put comments at the end of the report card. And the comment was always, all of primary school was he had so much potential, but he needed to focus more. He needed to put in a bit more effort. And so I started having lesson teachers or additional, teachers who would come back to the house and teach me from primary three all the way past even in high school summertime and in college as well, in university too. So I always had extra teachers. But the idea was he was just distracted. But I wasn't very much distracted. I guess the biggest influence of impact happened in high school and secondary school. By the time I got into SS1, most of primary school, junior high, I didn't play sports. At the time, I wasn't good or coordinated. So I was the kid who the kids wouldn't choose during break time to play football or soccer. So I end up playing with the girls doing like little hand games, things in the corner because I wasn't chosen to play. Somehow, the summer of JSS3 going into SS1, my parents got me a basketball hoop. So I figured I just spent hours and hours and hours shooting in the back. And in basketball, there's like the right way of shooting where you have your hands this way. But I would shoot from my chest, and I was pretty good at it. And I spent hours learning, watching basketball videos and something called N1, like street basketball. And I had changed secondary schools to this private prep school. So going into this school, I had learned how to shoot my way, and I had learned how to dribble my way. And I went from being the kid who had no swag to being on the basketball team. But here was what was interesting. What made me good was always my ability to read the game. I always kind of knew where the ball was going to be or where people were going to be. And at the time, I didn't know what it was. Also, I could read people. I could just tell what buttons you needed to push or not push to get to where you wanted to. Fun fact, my two best friends from primary and secondary school became my friends because I bought them.
Okay.
I
With
bought their
what?
friendship. Yes, I bought it because I was like the nerd. Like no one wanted to be friends with me. Like I was not the cool kid. I was the chubby kid. But I understood that, in boarding school because I was in boarding school where provisions or snacks were like the super interesting thing. I could give my Rice Krispies, my American snacks to my dad lived in America, and these guys could be friends with me. Or I had this little cousin who was very pretty that my friends had a crush on. And I promised that I would get her to write a letter because back in the day we would write letters and post letters, right? I would get her to write him a letter, and that's how we became friends. I mean, and then we built that friendship 20 plus years after we're still friends. Like, our wives are friends, our kids are friends. But it goes back to the masking, right? Having to figure out how to navigate things. And mind you, these were like the most popular kids in the class. So I knew that if I could get A and B to be friends with me, that would force everyone else to kind of be friends with me,
Mm.
you know. So I went through secondary school playing basketball, became an athlete, but never played conventionally like everyone else. And it's interesting because I just never understood why I couldn't follow sequences. I couldn't sequence properly. I would eat and spill things on myself. So I would always have a napkin. I would wear black or, I would always make a mess and they would make fun of me and they would whoop me, right? And I remember like traumas, like growing up and, very, very traumatic situation. I would hate watching TV with my dad. Why? Because you know how you watch the news, 'cause, like African parents watch CNN and BBC. You have teleprompters and the things going across, and he would be like, spell Wisconsin, spell something. And of course I couldn't spell. And next thing I would get is I tap in the head or something, like that. So I went through secondary school, spent 8 years in secondary school instead of 6 years. Um, again, barely passed, made it to university, and I went to university in private school in Nigeria. And by getting into university, first year was kind of easy because I'd done secondary school twice. And the first year is almost like your GCSE year because it's like a repeat. And I have like almost like a photographic memory. So it was easy. So I finished with a first. And Swagger, right? He finished with a first. Mind you, I'm studying computer engineering. The worst thing for someone like myself to be studying is computer engineering in Nigeria, where you have to memorize code and write it. Like this is not like here's a computer, write C plus C sharp. Like you're actually having to memorize code and go on the board and write it. And in exams, you have to memorize. And guess who's not exactly the best at memorizing sequences and numbers? So by second year in university, I go from a 4.5 GPA first to a 2.6. By the second semester, a 1.9 because now we're doing controls engineering, we're doing, the really difficult, really technical stuff. And I'm like, yeah, this is not for me. But I couldn't transfer, right? I couldn't do anything. So instead, I just started reading books about the world. I just started learning about how to learn. I think from my second year university till I was 25, I read an average of 50 books a year. And I started listening to would you call them podcasts? But at the time they were not just like audio recordings you put in MP3s, just learning about how to learn and really leaning towards quotes, leaning towards biography. Someone mentioned about having motivational speakers coming to come and talk to people and reading people. There was a book called Gifted Hands by Ben Carson. I read that book and I didn't understand what he was going on with him, but I knew that this guy seems like me. He made it, so I was going to make it. There was another book by a guy called Richard Branson called Losing My Virginity. I read that too, and I was like, this guy dropped out when he was 6, 7 years old, but ends up being this, successful mogul. I could do business, like I could do what he does. Didn't I know what the dyslexia part, totally skipped it. Didn't understand that part, but I knew that like I could see the wall, like I could see me in him. I could resonate with his story and history, right? His story. And I was like, that's my mentor. That's who I want to be like. And somehow that was why I love reading biographies, love reading people's stories, right? Like the Discovery Channel had this incredible, or History Channel, The Men Who Built America, right? Talks about Carnegie and the rest of them and all those interesting people. So like I love reading and watching things like that because that could help me process beyond my immediate environment. So to get past it was I didn't graduate when I was supposed to. I had 30 extra units after university. One more unit and I have to repeat the whole year, but luckily I got to do it in a term. I got all D's and they let me go. It was like just go. So I graduated with like a 2.7 GPA with an engineering degree. So I knew like, yeah, no masters, no one was going to hire me. In Nigeria, you need to have a 2.1 plus to like get a good job, right? And I was like, but I need to do something with my life. What do I know? When I was 19, I started my first business called Switch with some friends. It was a clothing line. That didn't work out for certain reasons. That's not what this podcast is about. But I learned from that experience. So now I'm like, what can I do? Well, I know how to sell clothes, but this time I need to learn how to make clothes. So my dad gave me a loan, and I went to a village in Nigeria called Aba, and I learned how to pick fabric, cut, and all of those things. And I took material and I moved back to Lagos, and I was going to start a clothing manufacturing business because no one's going to hire me, right? I'm unhireable. Like that's not my future. So I had to figure out how to survive. And I started making clothing, and one thing led to another thing. I met a gentleman who inspired me, and I started working for him. And I realized at that point in time that the concept or process of picking fabric, getting clients, sewing, processing, delivery is supply chain logistics. Like I was doing all of those processes, but without the structural framework of what that was. And eventually, one Sunday driving, I saw an email from the University of Kent, and it was like, "Are you interested in doing a master's?" I'm like, "In supply chain logistics." I'm like, why not? That's the other thing about me. Like I would push the boundaries, right? So I called this lady who was like a recruiter, and she was like, "Yeah, come see us in Lagos." On the Monday, I took everything I had. I knew I had a tutu. I knew that was like that was a disadvantage, but I had all this business experience. I was working with this guy in supply chain logistics and all these amazing things. So I put my degree at the bottom. That was the last thing I had in that folder. So we went and I had a suit on and I was, had a great 45-minute interview conversation. And the last question, she was like, "Oh yeah, by the way, like, what's your degree?" So I bring out this transcript and I give it to her and she's like, "We're a 2-1 only university, but you have all this great experience. Let's see what happens." 2 months later, I get a call. Someone dropped out. They have this supplementary position for this course, and if I could pay X amount of money in the next 24 hours, they would provisionally offer that to me. I paid the money. Now I'm in England. I'm in Kent. The same cycle. First 6 weeks of class, everything is going well. I'm doing well in operations management, warehousing, I'm doing great. Now we're going to Excel, data, C plus, C sharp, all the computer numbers things. And again, it's all blank. I'm pretty good at explaining myself, leading the teams. And this professor is like, "Hey, he's like, hey, there's something interesting about you. You do really well when you write like assignments, you do well at articulating yourself. But each time we do like tests or like time block things, you tend to just tank. I think you should go see the GNC or something, the guidance and counselors, right?" So I go and the man is like, "Have a sit, here's a computer, here's this test. It's like 45 minutes long. There's no wrong answer, just answer as best as possible." So I sit down and I do the test, and obviously he gets like an initial result, and he's like, "You failed woefully. Interesting." I'm like, "Yeah, I fail exams." And so I got an email the next day saying, "Hey, the university is willing but my case is quite unique. They find it quite unique that I had an undergrad in engineering and I made it in this far, that they're willing to pay 50%, but they want to fly in a specialist from Liverpool to come do this test, neurological test. But my family, my parents would have to sign on. Fun fact. So I'm like, okay, sure, why not? So I go home, I call my parents, and I tell them, African parents are like, "What? What's wrong with you?" "No, never. There's nothing like that. You are fine. Just focus, focus. You need to focus more." And right, you just need to work harder and be more focused, right? That's the story of my life. I need to focus and work harder. But I told my aunt, who's like, my mom's sister who raised me and who's always been that one person that's allowed me to take my time and express myself. And she's like, "Yeah, she'll pay half of it." And we do the 5, 6 hour test, the longest test of my life. And 6 weeks later, I get this 35-page document that says that I have dyslexia and dyspraxia. And I had never heard the word dyspraxia before, right? But then now I understood why I couldn't dribble and I made the food spill. But the dyslexia thing stood out because I was like, "Oh, interesting." So I wasn't dumb. I wasn't this. I wasn't that. It was really this. And oh, so I could actually pass. So mind you, I finished with a 2-2, right? Now I submit the result to the university. Obviously, they had the result. The university comes back and they say, "Hey, because of this, we think it's unfair to judge you based off all the tests and all the things you've done. We're going to strike out all those tests. We're going to judge you based off of your thesis and assignments." And mind you, this is towards the end of my program. So I end up finishing with a merit, 2 points from a distinction. So the same guy who was bottom of the barrel, all right, ends up 2 points from a distinction. And I think this is the same time tools like Grammarly and the technology is starting to help with like reading, writing, Claro Read, and things like that. And so I'm basically reborn now. There's this confidence, there's this knowledge, there's this feeling of I can do all things, plus my faith again. I'm a Christian in Christ who strengthens me. And the story of Joseph in the Bible has really been this North Star that I follow, right? Because in his own way, he might have been neurodiverse or something, but Homeboy had his own version of ups and downs. And that really changed everything. Just that professor looking at me and saying, go take that test. And
Mm.
that opportunity really just transformed everything.
Mm.
So I graduated 2015. This is 2025. 10 years after, I went from man with no prospects to working with 4 or 5 Fortune 100 companies leading up to being senior director to go to exiting my first business to then creating value and doing what I'm doing today. Right.
I'm fascinated that it never came up throughout your education from somebody who like would have flagged it and said, oh, maybe that's worth checking it out. And again, that's going back to that awareness again, like, are we having these conversations that we should be having?
But that's what's interesting, right? So growing up in Nigeria, Um, I never heard about neurodiversity. I never like now, yes, now, right? Now it's maybe a conversation, but in the 90s, 80s, 90s, and early
Mm.
2000s, it was, our curriculum everyone had the same thing. Like it's the same thing for everybody. And if you don't meet it, you're not good enough, right? And you start to wonder how many kids, how many people who ended up on the streets doing drugs, being disowned. Because in my culture, society where I come from, you're a lawyer, you're a doctor, you're an engineer, or you're a failure, right? It's maybe the last 8 minutes it became cool. 8 years it became cool to be a celebrity, an artist, a musician, an actor. Like the creative sector just became something you could aspire to, soccer, football, right? In the last 8 years. But everyone else who in the last 80, 100 years who didn't fit the mold or those spaces, where are they today?
Yeah. And that recognition that like academic excellence as it always was seen and like the path that you should go and the university that you should go to and everything doesn't actually it's not the thing anymore. It's actually what can you do with the talents that you've got and how can you go your own way.
But the standard assessments still stay the same,
Yeah.
really,
Yeah, the
largely.
curriculum doesn't change. Yeah.
Largely, and the GCSEs, A levels, degrees. Okay, you had a lot of adaptability in the end, Adara. I think that's down to an individual who had that perspective and sight and understanding. And but yeah, that's still the challenge we face.
I will say this also, like having worked in corporate settings here in the US and having been in management positions from like year three, right? Sitting in rooms where um equality or inclusivity is, I think where should I go? Where being in
Pilar,
rooms,
Pilar had
yeah,
Pilar
yeah,
had to
yeah,
leave.
yeah,
It
yeah,
was a bit too much.
I really resonated with what she said about, being in corporate places where it's like a checkbox, but it's not real, right? I've been in positions where I've been on the pip because of my emails or quality of not the emails, not the quality of the jobs, right? Um, and you realize that the system, the mechanism is not designed to accommodate or to allow people like us to thrive. But the beautiful thing is in times of disruption, like 2025 in the universe, in the 2025 AI post-COVID world, people like us are exactly what the world needs to forge ahead.
Agreed.
Right? It's a different kind of thinking. It's the ability to see beyond what's right in front of you and to navigate,
But
right? Those
I would
steps.
also say that neurotypical, neurodiverse, whatever, we should be supporting anybody to think out of the box, anyone to like use the skills that they have and the talents that they have. So I think that is also the thing. We're like, how do we foster that and make people want to do that? I'd like to wrap up with our tween talk question today, and anyone who'd like to answer. I want to help everyone feel part of the group, but some kids in my year behave differently. What's the best way to understand them? Adira, do you have an answer as I have you on?
Of course, of course, of course. I start by saying that everyone has something interesting about them. One of the things my mom taught me was if you pay enough attention to an individual, you will find something to compliment them about. In life, you're either going to see obstacles or you see opportunities. So when you see kids or individuals around you in school who are very different from you, and you see people, maybe other people trying to alienate them, um, first of all, be curious, right? Have an inquisitive mind, right? One of the greatest skills and gifts you will have, or we all have as individuals, is our imaginations. And when you're very imaginative and when you're curious minded, you're able to connect deeply. So start with a compliment. Walk up to that individual, that girl, that guy, and say to them, "How are you? Nice sweater, nice jacket, nice school bag, nice lunch," right? Ask them if they are drawing. Oh, this is interesting. Like, what's making you want to draw this? What character inspires you to want to be this? And in doing that, right, you will build a connection. The next thing then is be open, right? Being open is not just about what you say, it's also your body language, right? Closed fists, clenched bodies, squeezing your face, not smiling. That's not being open. But smiling at someone, showing a level of welcomeness or being welcoming allows them to then express themselves. And if you see someone being bullied or you see someone being made fun of because of something, well, one thing is standing and stand up for them. But if it's versus a crowd, definitely don't go get in and get into a fight. But after that happens, walk up to that individual and tell them, you know what, I see you. There's something special about you. So being able to compliment, finding something to I think positive about an individual, being open yourself to learning about people and staying curious, I believe is one of the most important gifts you could have in this situation.
Lovely. Thank you. Marcus?
Can I comment something on what Adira's just said? And so I absolutely agree with everything you've said about how to engage with people. And yet, everything you've said goes completely against what I, as an autistic person, feel innately. So I'll tell you, walking up to someone and complimenting them on something that I may not necessarily believe or have thought deeply about, I can't do. I mean, I can because I've taught myself to do it. And I know, like you know, that it works. So I do it. It feels wrong every time. Small talk. My tolerance for small talk is something like 15 seconds. Right. And then my eyes start rolling, I start looking around, and then I fidget, and then all of a sudden I just have to go, right? Body language. I'm 55. I don't understand body language other than other people, other than what I've, observed so long that I realize, okay, yeah, that person's probably slightly upset. But, the subtle signs that I have no idea what's going on. Anyway, my point is, this demonstrates two things. It demonstrates exactly what masking is, at least for autistic people. It's doing all these things when you either think they're wrong or you just don't understand them. But it also demonstrates, I think, that the way to answer your question, Penny, is through empathy. It's through really trying to understand, accepting the other person is different. They're going to behave differently. They're going to behave in ways that I don't understand and may make me feel uncomfortable. But they're not doing it to make me feel uncomfortable. They're not doing it because they want their whatever. They're doing it because that's the way they are. Most of the time, there are some true jerks out there, but forget those. Most people are just being themselves or want to be themselves. And that's what empathy is. It's accepting that other people can be themselves, meet them where they are. And if we do that, and I think Maya, you used the word empathy when you spoke, if we had more empathy for each other, not only for neurodivergent people, by the way, I think the world would be a whole better place.
Empathy comes up time and time again in the conversations that we're talking about and the work that we see people doing. And I think as well that curiosity, Adara, that you said as well, it's learning to be curious with empathy, and it's like to, not why are you drawing that? Oh, I really like it. Tell me more. You know, it's that, you know, it's not why, you know, do you act like this, but oh, are you happy or, you know, are you happy or sad at the moment? You know, that trying to understand and that takes, I think it's a skill, but it's a type of skills that young people, next generations, everyone needs to learn and can always continue to learn. And I think it's really important.
But I also think it's that lack of knowledge about the whole conversation. And I think that if you children want to learn, right? And we're talking about that curiosity. I think they need that support as well to understand the conversation and then be better equipped to be able to support the kids in their class as well. Empathy, absolutely, but also having a wider idea of what that's all about. Maya, what about you?
So I'm thinking about just being kind, like really being kind. Even if you quite don't understand the neurodiverse or you don't understand the behavior of other child, just be kind because it's like when you are not kind and you show it, it's like the other can feel more just not included, just feeling bad. So being kind. And other cases, just give a space, not pressure, because some of children, they need just quiet, other needs movement, and even some of needs to communicate in small groups, or it's just understand that and give them space is it can help feels them safe. So this is also important. And another case is like notice their strength because many neurodivergent kids have amazing skills and abilities like creativity, problem solving, focus, humor, memory, compassion. So when you see their strength and when you tell them, oh, you are like this or you are like this, it shows them that you understand their behavior, that you accept them, and you see the strength of them. And it's very important just to say, oh, wow, you made this in an amazing way because this or this, because this give us a power and other children will give also the power and even they feel more safe. Another case is ask, don't assume. Just ask, like you told before. Curiosity, ask. A simple, hi, is there anything that makes school easier or harder for you? Can just change the world or change the day in this one day by just one question. So I think they are very important cases. Just simply simply things, simple things. So like just be open-minded and try to understand and just be kind and smile. And when I'm thinking about my young ages and when I'm thinking about some of girls or boys in my classroom, and when I'm thinking about their behavior, and I know that maybe I wasn't nice for them or and I feel very bad because of this because today I understand that for example this girl she has autism or this boy had this or this girl had this, but it was okay. I was a child and I couldn't understand this because there was no problem like neurodiverse, there was no diverse problem. But I really think that I should be like a little bit nicer and to try to understand them. So just simple steps and be kind. And I think and sometimes just ask, hey, how are you? Or you're you made this wonderful or something simply.
It sounds so simple, but it's
Yes.
still hard. But I do think young people have access to this information now, and that's what we've really got to stand up and talk about, shout about, share the perspectives, share experiences, so that they can learn how to do these simple things effectively.
I hope so, because even if we are not talking about this in school, but we are living in the moment where so many people, famous people also, are start to talking about the neurodiversity. And so they are trying to show that this is not a stigma. So we don't want to have next generation like the same. We want inclusion, we want difference, because only different minds can change the world. And I think that even if we looked Maria Skłodowska-Curie, Albert Einstein, so many amazing, for example, Formula One drivers, or so amazing athletes, others, or so many amazing brains made so many amazing discoveries. And even if we will talk about neurodiversity like in single, it will be amazing. But I'm always saying that in single we have a power, but together we have an impact. So if we will talk together everywhere about neurodiversity, about differences, about amazing possibilities of young brains, and show that it's amazing to accept it, because we don't need fix to anything. We don't need to fix to our, I don't know, creation of our life made by our parents, or I don't know, just because someone told us that we need to be like this. No, we should be us. But first, we should accept it that we are different, just a little bit different.
And isn't it great that we have difference in this world? Because that's what it's all
Yes,
about. The more, the
but
better.
and because next, this acceptation will give you a freedom, or freedom to be yourself,
Yeah.
and freedom to believe in yourself.
And to live your
Because,
best life.
yes,
Thank you so much to our guests, Odira, Marcus, Maya, Lara, and Pilar, for sharing their stories, their experiences, and insights on neurodiversity. Your perspectives remind us that understanding difference isn't just a concept, it's a practice, it's a choice, and a way to build stronger connections in our classrooms, workplaces, and communities. Neurodiversity isn't new, it's something humans have always had, a reflection of the fact that no two minds are alike. Recognizing and celebrating that difference helps us see the value in perspectives, strengths, and ways of thinking that don't fit a single standard. To our listeners, thank you for tuning in. Every conversation, every interaction, and even every small choice is an opportunity to embrace, support, and celebrate the unique ways people think and experience the world. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, share it with friends, and leave a review so we can continue bringing these meaningful conversations to more people. We're Penny and Jenny, and this has been Perspectives from the Informed Perspective. Thank you for listening. Keep listening deeply, valuing difference, and until the next time, keep informing those perspectives.
Mm-hmm.